think that will be a wonderful opportunity for them. Okay, well, hi everyone. Hi, Linda. Thanks for joining us. My name's Lindsay Lopez. I am a training and development consultant with UNM Family Development Program. And we are joined today with our awesome panelists. And I also just want to say thank you to our director, Veronica, for helping me kind of man the tech scene in the background there. And thanks for joining us. All right, so we are here today to celebrate some really amazing men that work within the early childhood field. Let's see if I can share this a little better. Um, there we go. So this is what our kind of flow will look like today. And um, we are going to start with our introductions of our panelists and then move into our panel discussion. And then we should have a few minutes for some Q&A afterward. Um, we should have about 3 to 4 minutes per question ish per panelist. And then we may have a few minutes afterwards to expand on any ideas or ask any questions. So we're hoping that we pull out of this today why it is important for male figures to be involved in the early childhood profession. We want to celebrate past and current professionals along with celebrating positive masculinity and discuss how we can encourage more men to be a part of the early childhood workforce. All right. So let's move into our introductions. I will um, provide the name and introduction if you just want to give a wave so we can start to put a name to a face. And all right, we'll go ahead. All right, so first on deck, we have Samuel Rodriguez. Welcome, Sam. Thanks so much for joining us. Sam is a licensed social worker who has devoted his career to working with families because he feels that the family unit has the most substantial ability to nurture a child's well-being. Samuel has been an it has been an investigative placement and permanency worker under the umbrella of Child Protective Services. After his work with CPS, Samuel engaged in behavioral health work and treatment foster care programs. And Samuel later supervised caregivers in the central region of New Mexico. He then shifted his focus to working with infants, toddlers, and expecting mothers as an early intervention provider. His work experience has helped him understand the importance of family and enhanced his passion for supporting the family unit. Samuel has been deeply impacted by the reflective practice and he has developed throughout his career and advocates for reflective support to help improve outcomes for family, children, and providers. Sam is also a part of our UNM family development team, and thank you so much for being here today. Next up, we have Andrew Martinez. He is what he calls an early childhood education community support in the state of New Mexico. After working with various ages from infancy to age 12, Andrew holds a wide range of experience, adding up to over a dozen years, and has gained a bachelor's in early childhood multicultural education. He has facilitated various training opportunities for a variety of programs and has also supported a teacher mentor program, during which he held a role of lead mentor. He currently works as assistant director at a Reggio Emilia inspired program in downtown Albuquerque, is an instructor for early childhood education at Central New Mexico College, and also sits on the board for New Mexico Association for the Education of Young Children as the Vice President of Professional Development. Andrew has found a passion for supporting learners of all ages while emphasizing the value of community in which learning takes place. Thank you for joining us, Andrew. It's great to see you. We are also joined with Christian Soto. Christian is a proud member of the Family Development Program. He began his public servant journey as a community health worker for UNM's Science Center. While there, he learned best practices when working with families, encouraged and coached his patients to be their own advocates, and become familiar with the resources in the community that help families grow and thrive. Currently, he supports 4 different early childhood coalition communities in the state and has seen firsthand how important it is to acknowledge and greet every child with a smile. Christian has over 20 nieces and nephews, the youngest being 1 and the oldest turning 22. He loves New Mexico and wants the best for everyone in the state. Thank you so much for joining us, Christian. Christian is, as he mentioned in the bio, also an awesome member of our UNM Family Development Program. And finally, Joe DeBonis. He holds a master's degree and he is infant mental health endorsed, worked in the early childhood profession in different capacities for 40 years before retiring in 2021. His educational background includes a BA in psychology and a master's in counseling. At the UNM Center for Development and Disability, he provided training, support, and guidance for the New Mexico Home Visiting Program. He helped develop and provide ongoing support for the Child Care Inclusion Specialist System for 10 years and developed/implemented the Family Child Care Home Visiting Pilot Program. He specialized in providing reflective supervision and consultation while at UNM CDD. As a licensed clinical counselor, he worked in early intervention for 20 years. He facilitated parent groups, provided counseling, coordinated a child care inclusion project, and supervised family service coordinators for Altamira, specialized family services. Prior to this work, he worked as an early childhood educator for 5 years in Albuquerque. He is endorsed through the New Mexico Association for Infant Mental Health. And the work that he is most proud of is in individual and group reflective supervision he's provided over the years. Thank you so much for being here, Joe. It's great to see you.
Yeah. Maybe
Wonderful to see you all. I've had the opportunity of working with all 4 of these gentlemen in some capacity. So I'm just really honored that you had the time to spend with us today. And I'm excited to get our questions and our panel started. So I'm just going to throw out a question and anyone can jump in and kind of build on that. We'll kind of make it pretty informal if that's okay and move through there. Okay. So our first question, why do you feel it is important for men to work within this profession? We'll see who races to come off mute first.
all
Okay,
right.
Joe, it's Joe.
I'll go for it.
Thanks, Joe.
Well, as I was thinking about the questions beforehand, first thing that I thought of was how important it is for men and women to support and learn more about early childhood development, infant mental health, early childhood mental health, in order to recognize the importance of nurturing and raising children and how that impacts the future for all of us. And so I think, sometimes if it's got to do with early childhood, we still have some societal ideas about, well, then we're talking about this is work that women do.
Mhm.
And so I see it from the point of view of helpful for all of us, but also helpful for the men who do move into this work and are able to learn and contribute and have an impact on communities through their contributions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe.
I agree, Joe. And kind of building on what you've just shared, just how can we normalize, men being engaged and equal partners in nurturing children all across the board. And so I think if that would have been more modeled for me, and I think if those stereotypes are kind of addressed, we can help create or so build a more supportive community for everyone, so that there aren't limitations, and so that young children are exposed to both male and female providers, that will kind of as- create create new opportunities for their future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I agree with all of that, and I would say that go a little further and say that it's important that we get men and women in this profession, because men and women are leaving this profession in droves, and it's unfortunate. And I think it's partly to do with the fact that there's a population that doesn't feel welcomed or doesn't feel like they belong, and that's the male demographic. So I think once we start encouraging that demographic men to come to this profession, I think that we're going to see a big turnaround in this profession. Historically, I know that in the United States, the first teachers were all men, and as it became cheaper to hire women to be teachers, that's kind of where it went. So hopefully we can get it so that it's 50-50 at some point.
Great. Thanks, Christian.
Beautifully well said, everyone. And I just want to add, like, I didn't know that piece about teachers, all teachers being male back in the day. So I just want to give props to the women, because your women movement is working. You girls are getting things done. You guys took over our whole job. So 10 points for you, but let's share the wealth a little bit. But in my experience, being a male in this field, it's just the bee's knees. I mean, it's we. I feel like men bring a certain perspective, and no offense to women or anything like that. You girls have a lot to offer, but men just have a different perspective. Especially when I'm out in the field and I see um, these males working with these children, they have a different approach. They let these children take risks a little bit more than women are comfortable with. They let children stand on high places. They let children jump from high places, and they give children different opportunities that than women typically do. And it was interesting. I was watching this video a couple weeks back, and it comes down to a brain chemistry kind of thing. And so what they were doing is they were scanning some of these kids' brains as they were interacting with their fathers and their mothers, males versus females. And what was interesting is that the endorphins that we're all striving to have and make sure that these children are getting enough of, those endorphins were more present with women when they were nurturing their children, having that cuddle time, having that reading time, having this typical learning time per se. What was interesting is that when the children were interacting with males, those endorphins went off when they were playing with them, when they were doing all of these rough and tumble plays and jumping off these high places. And so just for like a in my mind, a brain chemistry balance kind of thing, we need both of these entities of a masculine energy and a feminine energy, because in the end we all of us are, we each of us have these qualities of masculine and feminine. It's not one or the other. And so just having that representation of what being a human is, and having both perspectives and both approaches, opens so many doors.
So well said by all four of you. What a great, example to bring into the conversation from that study, Andrew. Thank you. And what is really resonating from all four of your comments to me is that nurturing approach, normalizing that ability for men to be nurturers, and like Sam said, being equal partners in nurturing. Christian, you touched on something so important, our staffing crises within the early childhood professional, not just within our state, but really truly nationally. But focusing on our state, we really are seeing the effects of that. And so we want to recruit everyone to be in this awesome profession. And that feeling of belonging, right? You touched on that, of men feeling like they belong in this profession, and they absolutely do, because what Andrew said, that perspective and the balance of both masculine and feminine energy, and how important that is, and what we get as humans and what children get, as they're developing from interacting with both. I think that's amazing. In my experience in early childhood education and early intervention, it was so amazing to have balance on my team with both men and women, different perspectives, as well as it was really great to see how children interacted with both of us, men and women, and especially for, I thought was so important for young boys to see positive, nurturing role models. All right, excellent. We've started off on a really, really insightful foot. Um, okay, so next question. What are some qualities of yourself that have been or is important to your work?
I know for myself, it's been a big piece of movement. I've become such an advocate for having children, allowing children to move, but also allowing them to move purposely. Um, I see the risk that these children want to take, and I see that they want to try this, but they've been told so many times, whether it's from their major caregivers or even just the bigger society, of we need to keep kids safe in this bubble. So in my experience, it's been allowing them to move and allowing them to take risks, allowing them to stand on monkey bars, jump off of those things, and that's just the big piece that I feel that I brought.
Awesome, Andrew. Really makes me think of being that supportive role to allow children to explore their environment. And I think I saw Joe come off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about emotional intelligence and the ability to develop relationships. I feel like over the years, I learned how to do that pretty well. And to be able to entertain somebody else's perspective, to ask questions, be a good listener, all of those things had helped me over the years in the work. And I think really were crucial. Working on teams, working with children or families, working with your colleagues, all of that is so important for the success, for the individual success, but the success of the system in general. And I think one thing that I was really grateful for was learning about reflective practice and how much I benefited from it personally. And when we think about the use of reflective practice for professional and personal growth, because they go hand in hand, we bring ourselves to the work. And how I learned so much by having that time to reflect rather than rushing from one event to the next, taking events, taking experiences, stopping, pausing, reflecting, and then moving forward better informed. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Go ahead, Sam.
So I'm going to build on that reflective capacity because I really think that that's empowered so much internally and externally for me. And I probably think that's it's the single most important skill that I've developed throughout my career. And so I think as I kind of prepared for today mentally, it I did like an overview, and interestingly, in an earlier conversation with Tamara, just it made me think about what is empowered with reflective capacity. And so, and what it does when we do that in partnership with the communities that we serve, um, and just the small, so from the very small conversations that we have in direct partnership with children and families, all the way to the larger group efforts when we're working in partnership with communities. So I see the whole range of experiences and just some of the direct coaching that we do. And I have the privilege, and so I think it's also important to recognize that I also have connections to all of the panelists and just the resources, the resources, the way that we are a resource to one another, and how important that is. And so I am connected with Andrew through Christina Kent, through my work with Christina Kent. And we are engaged in so much reflective practice through our consultation, through our direct work together. And I feel that there's mutual learning from those experiences. And so that's what I'm grateful for. Just the what is empowered with that openness and curiosity on both sides, and how we both grow and learn together through that experience.
Thank you, Sam.
Well, I have to say that I consider myself to be a really good cheerleader. I like to encourage people. I like to find their strengths. I did that when I worked when I took a semester class, and I had to do 15 hours in a classroom at Explora, which was really enjoyable. But I just found myself like finding all the strengths that all the kids had and really building on that. I think that's something that I bring to the table. That's a characteristic, a strength that I have. I really enjoy doing that. It doesn't cost me much energy. If anything, it charges my batteries.
Oh, I love that. Finding ways to fill our cups, Christian, is really important in the work that we do. I love that you said, finding their strengths and celebrating that, because that is a huge component of reflective practice, right? So, Joe and Sam really dove into that. Sam has been utilizing a term recently too, and it really made me think of this in this conversation with what Joe said, as well as what you were saying, Sam, is, you know, really finding balance in that supportive ecosystem. So balance of men and women and professionals, also the things and the strengths that we bring to our supportive ecosystems. We can think of a supportive ecosystem as a family unit, as the teams we work in, or in with and on, and also our communities and so on. The emotional intelligence piece was really important to relationships, and how it's fascinating how we as individuals build relationships in different ways, but men bring that really interesting perspective to that. And such a great um way to tie in reflective practice to what we do, because I do find that so many men that I've worked with in the past have been such great deep listeners, and I really appreciate that quality. But that openness and curiosity that Sam mentioned, which is also a component of reflective practice, builds right into what Andrew said. You know, risk taking, exploring, and teaching the kiddos and teaching those that we work with to remain open and curious. Oh, this is so awesome. Thank you all. Okay, our third question. How can we celebrate men that work in the field and empower others to step into the field and within leadership within early childhood? Andrew has the thinking face on.
Well, I've often thought about this for so long, so many times, and gosh, I don't know. It's to me, it's one of those questions. How can we? What if? Like in my mind, what if everybody just had this exposure to early childhood to see what it is about? Whether it's a course in high school, having that requirement, or a course in some kind of social service humanities during a college program, something along those lines to where that we're just exposing people to things, to the opportunities that are out there, especially when it comes to these human services. A lot of people find a lot of meaning behind these human services, whether it's early childhood, um, speech therapy, pediatric nurses, doctors, whatever the case. So just having that kind of experience and having the exposure to what's out there and having and realizing that it is fun and it's great. But it's more than just fun and it's great. And we're doing more than just playing with kids. And I think that's where we kind of the lines get blurry and people kind of steer away from things is we're just playing with kids, but there's so much more to it that the general public doesn't realize, that we're not only playing, but we're building relationships with one another between the family members and their children. We're building that brain development. We're building our own practice. I myself give a lot of gratitude to the growth that I have had and experienced while working in the field. It's amazing, and I honestly don't think that I'd be the same kind of person if I wasn't. And so just realizing the benefit, the overall benefit, personally and community wise, about what early childhood can bring.
Wow, Andrew, really made me think of that filling your cup piece, like and Christian was mentioning earlier of these things that can be fun and not really take so much energy and really charge our batteries. Cool.
Um, uh, I'd like to address the second part of that, how to empower more men to step into the field. And one way I think we can do that is in service provision and providing early intervention and providing home visiting and providing early childhood classrooms to be sure that we are making those environments welcoming to men. And we do that in many ways. So in a classroom, it may be having photos of men and babies. In home visiting or early intervention, it could be the literature on a website, again, pictures. It's how we speak to each other and to families about early childhood services, early childhood education. So for instance, when we talk about home visiting, and especially with very young children and infants, are we doing trainings and talking about moms and their babies? Or are we talking about moms and dads and their babies? And to be conscious of that and to look through our materials, our websites, our trainings, and be sure that we are equally inviting men and women, and that there's an expectation that men will participate, rather than that be the default. You know, oh yeah, dad can join this home visiting experience. That we start with that expectation. So we bring the dads in and make them feel comfortable and realize this is a place dads are welcome and should feel comfortable. And then I think you have a natural kind of, and some men that I know that worked in the field, you know, I'd like to do this work, you know, because they've been invited, they've felt comfortable in early childhood services or education. So,
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Wow. We just think about historically how men have just been in a different place when it comes to pregnancy and birth, smoking the cigars in the waiting room, or, when they go into the OBGYN office with their, partner, maybe the literature is not really geared towards, dads, or sometimes abuelitos, and, others that might be that positive male role model in a child's life. And thinking about this as a piece of equity. So let's come back to that and talk about it in a bit, that piece of equity and inclusion. And let's go on to Sam.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring up another very important historical component. So,
Please do.
I coincidentally caught just a little bit of Kindergarten Cop, and I don't know if you remember the movie, but it starred Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's interesting because that movie was kind of pivotal for me because it brought awareness to how men aren't accepted in those types of roles. and how it kind of shaped. I was always interested in being a teacher, and I redirected that interest to being a social worker because I identified that as a more acceptable role. And I'm grateful for the versatility that my degree has offered me, but it really redirected my natural interest in being an educator. And my dad was an educator, and he was a double major, so he was a social worker and a teacher, but he always taught. Um, and so I think it goes back to the ecosystem. How do we create a system that is open to all? And how do we build more stronger sensitivities around that and how we treat one another? Because it's still an issue for some families to have a male teacher or a male home visitor, and so it makes me think about when I applied for my position as an early interventionist. Just thinking, my supervisor at the time, Harry Friedman, I was so grateful because she was courageous enough to entertain a male being hiring a male in that role, and knowing that she saw something in me. And so it's that relational component that you were talking about earlier, Joe, just like those experiences empower so much, and we never know the ripple effect of it. And so the other concrete thing that I've been involved in, and so I think by virtue of modeling what we do, the way we practice and what we model out in the field is super important. So we can't underestimate the power of those efforts. The other thing that came to mind is I'm frequently invited to be a guest speaker in college courses, all the way from introduction to the 411 courses, as students are contemplating, their career opportunities. And so that's a good way for us to introduce, or me being a part of those classes, to kind of create awareness about opportunities for all of these students in early childhood. And so I'm finding more and more that they are surprised about the wide range of opportunities within the early childhood field. And so pleased to also note just that there's a lot of diversity in those classes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sam. I mean, Andrew touched upon that as well, exposing folks to the wide range of professions within the early childhood world. I know that when I went to school, I had no idea I would end up in this world. I knew I wanted to work with children. And but I know I've landed in the right place, but I had no idea the possibilities. So yeah, that's a really great point.
Well, I'm listening to everyone and agreeing with everything, and just thinking about how at the end of the day, for me, I mean, I know it's not as simple as this, but I think a big step would be economics and just paying more. I think that if men saw that they were getting paid just as much to be teachers as they are to be engineers or whatever profession that we normally subscribe to men, um, I think there would be a huge shift. I think people would really find it a rewarding career because they have the opportunity to explore it a little bit more. But unfortunately, that hasn't always been the case. And I think that just the way that sometimes family structures are set up, it's the responsibility typically of the male to continue working while the spouse or the female, take some time off to raise a family and whatnot. And so I think they have to consider those things when considering what jobs or professions that they're going to seek out. But if we didn't have those issues, I think we'd see a lot more men in the profession.
Thank you, Christian. Excellent point. I know that all of us in this room are aware of the early childhood pay disparities, right? The lower wages that we see within the early childhood world. And that, is across the board for men and women. But it really, when you were talking, it really made me think of that historical stereotype and stigma that we sometimes attach to men being the breadwinner. So why would maybe men choose a field if that's the case that does hold true within their family system? Why would they choose a field that pays a little bit less? So that's a great, excellent point. And it ties into what we talked about earlier as, we face some staffing challenges and our profession growth and challenges to that. Wow. This has been so insightful and just so great to have this conversation and start the conversation because we want to continue to build on opportunities like this and maybe host this panel a couple of times a year and invite more folks to this and continue to grow. What I was just hearing from that last question, Andrew spoke about the exposure to the profession. Sam touched upon that too. And something that we all can do is talk about it in our communities or college courses. And if our panelists have opportunities to be invited to spaces such as that they can talk about the exciting possibilities and opportunities in early childhood for men, especially. And there are so many different professions to explore within that, within just the early intervention, education, care, and home visiting realm, infant early childhood mental health, and the professions that support within those or indirectly support those professions. And I thought about when we were talking about that too. I know so many educators that moved into their line of work because their child was going to a Head Start or a pre-K, and they thought, gosh, this is really a great opportunity. And they started to want to work there. Or home visitors that started, in the home visiting field as families and transitioned to becoming a home visitor because that service was so impactful to them. I know so many folks like that. So how many dads, how many uncles, how many grandpas out there, um, awesome neighbors that are involved in kiddos' lives might want to follow the same path, right? That made me really think about that. The equity piece, I want to come back to that. But first, we did talk about um, dads being an inspiration, modeling. Of course, the opportunities that are available to all early childhood professionals, but especially men. But let's kind of dive into the equity piece a little bit, if y'all don't mind, because that's a really trendy topic in the early childhood world and profession, but just in the workforce in general: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we most of us, all of us, have attended trainings, have found ways to incorporate policies into what we do that is supportive of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, and then the other side to that is um, what I always come back to and refer to when talking about this subject in the early childhood world is exactly Andrew, in his bio, his degree path, and early childhood education, multicultural education. And we include that piece in there, multicultural. So we really do have this foundational piece and framework with it that's kind of ingrained in the early childhood world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Joe gave us some really great examples on how we can just make that feeling more inclusive with pictures in the classroom and what we see in the doctor's offices and the literature that we give, celebrating families, all kinds of different families and different parts of the families, including, of course, men. And that dads and male role models can be an inspiration. They're not just an afterthought. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on just sparking that conversation of including that component of thinking about men when we talk about equity.
I'm not sure how this connects, but hopefully it does. I think we all can recognize how the world has been, but how our country has been the last number of years, and things being so divisive, and so much hate out there in the media. And I think people of a certain nature want to do something about that. And so I think that providing some of the information about the impact of early childhood education, early intervention, home visiting around the growth, what we know about brain development and how much of that happens in the early years. I think that would be a great sell for people who have seen, and maybe this is a younger generation thing, people who have lived through and seen a world that they don't like and they want it to be different. And selling this field, working in this field, and not only that, but again, being a parent and focusing on their child's development, I think that could be an angle to use to help make the world a better place.
I love that, Joe. I love that so much. We want it to be different. We want to make improvements. We want to have hope. We want to make the world a better place. Go ahead, Sam.
So I'm really kind of stuck with the strengths-based perspective as you with the share. And Joe, it kind of takes me back to my early intervention days. And I remember one of the families that I was working with, a father who had some limitations, but really wanted the best for his daughter. And I just remember his bus ride to get his daughter to a medical appointment, and what it took for him to get her there. And I remember he was photographed for the Fit calendar, and what it meant to him to have like that. A photo was provided, a beautiful photo of the family was provided to them, and it was framed. And I just remember like how proud he was of that experience, and just what a nice representation that was for to go out statewide. And if people only knew like what he did to support his daughter, and just the beautiful relationship that was captured in that photograph. So that picture really told 1,000 words. But if people only knew like what it took for him to support his daughter. And so I'm grateful that I've had many opportunities to work in partnership with fathers supporting their young child, and some with some very unique circumstances and what they lived through. So when I talk about the reflective practice, that's super important to recognize those strengths, what they were doing in partnership with their child, but also for me to be open to that growth. And so those are the little things. And so I think the more we can share those stories, we'll start to recognize the ripple effect of what comes of that share.
Thank you for sharing such a heartwarming and touching story. Just a perfect example. And it comes back to that relationship, right? And the pride of the father, and the, just the lengths of what dads will do to ensure that their kiddos are taken care of. That's such a great story. Thanks, Sam.
Yes, thank you, Sam. That was it's a very powerful, very emotional story. Thanks for sharing that. When I was thinking about equity, equality, what came to mind was this idea that we give men as being the punishers, I guess. So growing up, it was like my dad who would be the one that was in charge of like the strict punishments. And I've heard from several like Head Starts or elementary schools that they'll pull like the male teacher out of the classroom so that they can discipline the boy in the next classroom or across the hall. And I was just thinking like how unfair that is, because what if you want to be the fun teacher? What if you want to be the one that smiles and just like gives like, oh, let's talk about what you did wrong. You're not given that opportunity because you're a man, and you just, for some folks, represent that that perfect fit of discipline. I said Punisher, but I meant discipline. Punisher is really extreme. That'd be a different panel. But yeah, so I think that equity, just giving the opportunity for teachers to really enjoy what they do and grow, and not having a bias when you hire them as fulfilling something, is something that I want to explore a little bit more. And I think that is something that the state should explore as well, or everyone should explore.
Oh, thanks, Christian. And that's a great example of just thinking about the stereotypes, that males face within the profession for sure.
I think those are all beautiful points, especially like the perspective thing, the perspective piece, and it's the little things that I think that matter the most. And so when Joe was mentioning things like the magazines at the doctor offices, I mean, they are generally aimed towards women, and so why not have the guns and trucks magazines in the doctor's office waiting for sorry, as these dads are waiting for their children, have these equitable magazines there as well. And the other piece that as a male, as a male in this field, I see the materials are to me, they're very, the materials in itself are very gender biased. They're very colorful. They're very pretty. They're very cutesy. And men, I like the realistic stuff. I want to see actual tools here. I want to see some blacks and some browns and some grays and some steel things and some hardware things and things that children are actually going to use. And as cute and as beautiful as these materials are, how representation, I don't know the right word, how much of a representation do they have of the real world? How much of a representation do these materials have of the masculine energy? How much of this representation do these materials have when it comes to a male in the classroom? And so like we're saying, it's all these little pieces that shape our perspective. So we're seeing all these cutesy dootsy things, and who likes the cutesy things? You girls in your Pinterest. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful thing with lots of ideas, but there's so much more out there. And so we need to figure out what else is out there. What can we bring in? What can we expose these children to in a health and safety manner?
Thanks, Andrew. That's for sure. I mean, even just seeing representation in those doctors' offices and in those spaces of men and women, and appealing to that, and appealing to both. For sure. Janelle says in the chat, you all are amazing. Thank you. You all are inspiring. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to listen to your ideas and thoughts today. I second that for sure. I'd love to open it up to our participants. Do you have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share with our panelists? Anything you'd like our panelists to build upon?
I want to say that this has been very insightful, and I appreciate everything that each and every one of you shared. Going back to a couple of things that kind of spoke to me, Andrew, I really loved how you spoke about healthy risk taking with children, and how we tend to kind of like, hover and not encourage kids to do that. And it really brought back this memory of my son. He was 3 years old, and when we moved into a new place, there was a big tire swing in the backyard, and I shared this very often with families, because it kind of even brings tears to my eyes. But stepdad was in the back with him, and he had him on this tire swing standing, and he was swinging him. And I would say that he was probably about, I'm 5 foot, but he was about there, and he was laughing, and I was looking out the window freaking out. But I took a moment to see him and to see the joy he had. And I said, I want to be part of this. So I opened the door and I stepped outside, and immediately when he started to see me, when he saw me, he started to cry. And he said, get me down, this is scary. And it was really eye-opening to me of how I took that away from him. with my feelings, right? Because our kids are always like reading us and they know what we feel. So I really think that that's an important reason to have men in the classroom, to have men involved in children's lives in a different setting. I also wanted to go back to something that Joe spoke of. He said, representation of men in the classroom and having them part of home visits. And one of the things that I always tried to do as a home visitor was welcome dads. They were like in the background and they were walking by, and I was like, hi Daniel, how are you? Even though he wasn't on the screen, and he would come and say, hi Tamara, right? And eventually that dad would come and sit next to mom and be part of that visit. Or I would say, please ask dad if he has any questions. I'm going to give you this information, share it with him. If he has questions, because he was at work, here, you guys can both text me or whatever. But I always made that really open for dads to participate. The one thing that in conversations with other home visitors, though, is that I realize that there's kind of this unconscious bias that even women in the field have surrounding men, and women saying, I feel uncomfortable having visits with dads. I feel uncomfortable having visits alone with the dad. And we were like, why? And where is this coming from? And it was like something that we had to kind of open up as a conversation for the home visitors to kind of dissect why, and how that's not, that shouldn't be an issue as a professional educator when you're working with families. So, Christian mentioned sometimes men feel unwelcomed in this field. My question to all of you is, do you remember a time in your career where you felt unwelcomed, or you felt somebody have that unconscious bias because you were a male in the field? And how did you prevent that from moving forward and being the amazing men you are working with children?
Excellent question, Tamara.
Example jumped into my head. It wasn't work, but when me and my wife had our children, we both worked part-time and stayed home part-time. So we both had that privilege and opportunity to raise our kids. And one time my oldest son, Joseph, he was maybe 2, and I got him in the shopping cart. We're going into Target, and an older woman saw us and she said, oh, how cute. Are you babysitting today? And it was like, no, I can't babysit my son. But it felt like a criticism of sorts. Knowing, and I don't think she meant it that way, but knowing that this is what I do with my son, someone from the outside seeing it as doing mom's work or something. And it made me feel, yeah. So I think that might address what you were saying.
Yeah, for sure.
So I can remember a moment where I was working as an investigative worker with CPS, where I had to interview children at school at times, and I just remember the principal would not allow me to meet with a child, and I had legally, I had every right to do so, and that principal was not fully informed about state law around that, and insisted on being a part of the interview. And I just remember like what that discomfort meant to me in that moment, and how it impeded the investigative process. And so I had to get organized around what I was charged with doing in that moment, and sorting out all of the things that kind of felt personal in that moment too, and the bias that I was working against. And so I had to kind of just figure out how to navigate through that situation, and sort out through that stuff legally, post experience. But I just remember being perplexed with that, and having to work through that resistance with that principal. and their administrative team in a rural community. And that was that was just a very complicated experience. And so and I think that that's not unique to me as a male, but I think there were extra layers that I experienced because I was male and I am a gay male. So and there's all those affiliation, you know, there's some biases around that. And so I think there's extra layers with that.
Sam, that is so important when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, to also talk about intersectionality and how those things really add those layers too. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Oh, Tamara, I got one that I'm sure Joe, Sam, and Andrew can all agree with or have had this experience as well. So Andrew and I took part in the STEAM Summit this past weekend, and I was facilitating a workshop, and I was getting my classroom ready for a group of anywhere between 20 and 30 people. And I was interrupted because the lady next door, the other facilitator, she wanted tables moved. I said, yeah, I can't help you. I'm sorry. She said, well, can you help me move some of your chairs from your classroom into my classroom? And I said, no, I mean, normally I would, but I need to really get my classroom ready. But it's one of those things where it's, I feel like we're looked at as like free labor, like we have to move the heavy stuff around. And then if things get uncomfortable, like at a coalition meeting or something, and voices are raised, people look at us like, you need to go and handle this, right? Like you're the guy, you go and talk to this person a certain way. And so, yeah, I think we're kind of thrown into, and I don't mean to speak for Sam, Andrew, or Joe. Maybe you guys haven't had this experience, but it sure has happened a lot to me. And maybe it's because I'm a big guy, that they think that I can move the tables across and that my back is perfect. But yeah.
Wow, Christian, it really ties into the stereotypes, right, that we associate with men and women and whatnot. But working in early childhood education, I've literally had parents, request that they do not have a male teacher or to be removed from a male teacher's classroom, but they had no problem with the male bus driver or the male janitor. And so there's that stereotype, like I'm okay with the male working there, but I'm not okay with the male working in the classroom. So that was always really frustrating to me. Like, you don't know how wonderful this teacher is. Actually, your child's missing out on not being with this amazing teacher. It is coming up on time. I want to give Andrew an opportunity to answer this question, but if you do have to hop off, we totally understand.
I can make it quick though. In my experience, I have experienced the, hey, can you lift this for me? Hey, can you move this for me? Happens all the time. I'm used to it, but I kind of see what you're saying. Like it's those little things that shifts that perspective. But personally, I've never felt the feeling of being discriminated against per se for being a male. Personally, I have had a teacher of mine that I was supervising. One of the parents had requested that he didn't change diapers, and we are like, "Sorry, like that we were not doing that. Like, there's no way around that. He's a teacher. He's a male. He's background certified, just like all the other teachers here. There's no way going around this. I'm sorry. Like, we can't control that. They got over it, which is fine. So that was one scenario. Another scenario was actually one of my co-teachers that I was working with had let me know that a parent had asked her about my working in the classroom, asking her if she was comfortable with it. The teacher totally had my back, and I wasn't even aware that family member had felt that way. So I think kind of just pushing, in my experience, just kind of pushing through it and just like I didn't even notice. It's just another day, just another job. And that kind of helps push me through those kind of tough situations. Like it or leave it, I'm here. It's up to you.
If we could all take in that confidence, Andrew. I love that. Joe added a resource.
A resource. Years ago, we brought Kyle Pruitt to Albuquerque, to New Mexico to speak on father's involvement. He's been doing this work for decades. I think he's still working, but if you Google his name, he also had a book, The Nurturing Father, Journey Towards the Complete Man. Great resource as far as father involvement in their children's lives.
Thank you so much for that resource. I'm going to check it out myself. Wow. Veronica added in the chat, great workshop. I would love to see these men and others in early childhood talk to our middle and high school students. Y'all are so inspiring. Oh my gosh. Yes, Veronica. I totally agree. Any other last minute comments or anything last minute our panelists would like to share?
I just want to say that we here, Joe, Christian, Sam, I appreciate each of you for being the representation of the men and the possibilities and the potential that we all carry. And we are the movement that is happening. We are the representations. Go out there and continue doing what you're doing in your beautiful community, because you guys are amazing.
Y se puede. Yes, I love that. I love that so much. And on that note, just a heartfelt, huge gratitude to our panelists today, to all of you that joined us to listen, and a huge celebration and clap to you all, our panelists, for the work that you do, that you've done, and just being the really awesome dudes we know. Thank you so, so much. We are so grateful to you all. Thank you for leading the way and for modeling and opening up doors for many men to step into this amazing profession. Celebrate you. Awesome. Thank you all so, so much. Linda says thank you. Great information. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day.